Looks like you hit record. All right. Well, welcome everyone to week 4 of The Secret to Thriving in Any Economic Cycle. This is the last week of our hard teaching. So we're just going to kind of jump right into things and close a bunch of loops today, but there may be a couple that are still open for you, and that's what the 2 weeks of Q&A at the end are designed for. You'll notice, though, this week that we have quote of the day 1. So we have more than one quote of the day. We have 2 quotes of the day, and they kind of work together. And the first one is one that I think we come back to it really, really often, and so succinct. So people prefer the certainty of misery to the misery of uncertainty. Nick, how many times in a week do you point that out to folks?
Depends on the week. On weeks where I actually have to talk to people quite often. Many times. It's one of those, I don't want to spend a ton of time. We could spend hours on just the quotes. It's one of those things that once you see it can quickly become a fundamental truth, and you can quickly gut check yourself. Why am I acting this way? Well, am I preferring the certainty of misery? Why do I stay in this bad relationship? Well, I don't want to do something different because, you can always say, wait a minute, is it acceptable for me to choose to stay miserable because I'm afraid of the unknown, right? So it's just a really powerful, succinct quote that is also a gut check.
100%. I'm going to let you take the next one. It's from your guy.
Yeah, Nassim Nicholas Taleb. So just as stoicism is the domestication, not the elimination of emotions, so is the barbell a domestication, not the elimination of uncertainty. And obviously, we're all about certainty, the big certainty U in the top right. And Nassim Taleb is a successful trader. And, we do a lot of trading as well. And I'm a huge fan of stoicism as well. And the thing that trips people up is that you feel like you're supposed to get rid of these things. How do I get rid of these things? And by not understanding that you can't get rid of some of these things, you build fragile systems that are going to fall apart. We talked a lot about the system being engineered to produce an outcome. And so for us, it's really important to understand that, emotions don't go away. We talked about acknowledging our biases and all that stuff. We can't pretend like they're going to go away. It's juvenile at best, dangerous at worst. What we need to do is build a system to domesticate our emotions, to be aware of them, and to keep them from causing us to blow ourselves up. Now, what we're going to talk about today is a bimodal strategy, the barbell. And again, it is not, we cannot possibly eliminate all uncertainty, all risk. Knowing that, we should not pretend that we can. And the barbell, what we're talking about today, will help you strategize in a way that acknowledges that there is indeed going to be uncertainty, and we can domesticate it. We can control over it. We can not be blindsided by it. So it's, again, just as stoicism is the domestication, not the elimination of emotions, right? Control them, don't eliminate them. The bimodal strategy, the barbell, is a domestication, not elimination of uncertainty. We're going to be aware of it, and we're going to control it the best we can. We cannot eliminate it entirely.
Awesome. So with that, let's kind of jump back in for a quick refresher. So last week, we started the discussion about the CASE framework. CASE is an acronym that we created that stands for collect, analyze, strategize, and execute. And it's really in that order that we want to do things. So many times we just jump to strategy. You come in after a weekend and you got all these ideas and you get on the whiteboard and you're coming up with all these different things you're going to do. And then you don't do anything with it. Or you come in and you just start executing, you start doing a bunch of stuff, making a bunch of decisions. The problem is that just like Google Maps, we keep making that reference, but Google Maps is only correct if you give it the accurate and complete starting point and final destination. If either one of those is incorrect, then you end up in the wrong place. So the strategy and the execution aren't necessarily going to get you to the outcome you want unless you've properly collected all the data and analyzed it. We see oftentimes, go to events and come back with a bunch of strategies. We don't execute them, or we execute them and they don't end up with the outcome that we wanted because we didn't get the right starting position. We didn't collect and analyze. We take information from Jay Abraham and Steve Sims, who are friends of ours. They have super powerful frameworks and tools. Have to be really, really careful to make sure that we're applying it where we're at right now, meeting each person at their own individual point of need. So the strategy that they're talking about, we have to go back and go, okay, well, where does this fit into where we're at right now? So we have to collect and analyze the danger most business owners get stuck in. They're just strategizing, they're just executing. They didn't do the collection and analyze phase. So we walked through how to collect some data, just as a practical example, and how to analyze it. So we talked about the investor frame, professional skeptic, parenting frame, commissioner frame. The beauty of all of this is that what we're showing you with the case framework can be applied to any domain, discipline. In our CCA program, our Certified Certainty Advisor program, one of the principles that we teach is what we call biasing T-learning over I-learning. I-learning is where you are super, super domain dependent. You just focus on that specific domain to try and solve all your problems. But there's a hack, there's a way that we can get there faster, which is through T-learning, looking to other domains, natural law, things that we already know to be true, and applying it to our specific situation. So just by way of proxy, you can do the same thing with the case framework. Right now, we're mostly applying it to the domain of finance and wealth, but you can take all of these same frameworks and principles and apply them really anywhere else. With that, we'll jump into strategy and execution and hopefully close some loops for you. There may be a few that are still open, and again, that's what we'll use the Q&A for in the 2 weeks that are going to follow. So before we get into strategy and execution, let's just go back to social versus market norms. So quick refresher, we gave the case study from Predictably Irrational, where there was a daycare that was concerned about parents picking up their kids late, so they implemented a late fee, thinking that that would deter people from coming late. And what happened is that more parents started coming late. So the outcome that they wanted was parents to come on time. The outcome that they got was that more parents were coming late. And so, how is that possible? We're now charging them a fee. Well, what we did is we had a social relationship with our social norm with the parents, because the parents are caring for their kids. And they didn't want to show up late because they felt like they had a relationship with the teachers or daycare workers. And so if they were showing up late, they felt bad about it. But once you assign a fee to it, now it's a transaction. Now we've moved to a market norm situation. Now more people are showing up late because I just pay a fee. What you establish, there's a cost for me to show up late. So now we're in a market norm situation. We're no longer in a social norm. Once you breach that social market norm gap, it's really difficult to go back. So in the daycare example, they tried to remove the fee, and it didn't really change the behavior. The new baseline continued because they broke the social market norm. When you have a business that's built on social norms, like my CPA firm, Next consulting firm, Mastery Mode, etc., when you have a social norm business, it's inherently not a 10x overnight business. You cannot 10x relationships. We can't just scale it to the moon. Nick, anything you want to add on to that before I fully turn it over to you for the next slide?
I think you nailed it. I think it's important to realize that if you just said it, if you have a relationship business, then you cannot scale. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do your business. It's just understand that you could have a chiropractor that decided to license stuff out and scale that to the moon and have no relationships with these people, right? And try to emulate that. But that would be an entirely different business model. And so that's part of the compile and analyze is just recognizing, oh, this is a relationship business and that's not. It's incredibly, the returns become incredibly diminished. And I think we'll talk about that later when you take a relationship business and treat it as if it is not one.
Now with it, I'm going to turn over to you, Nick, and let's talk about in the strategy phase, getting really, really clear on explore versus exploit. And outside of getting centered around the idea of we're biasing closer versus more is the key tenet. Every action needs to get us closer to the things that we want. We can turn that into a solvable equation. That was week 1 and week 2. This frame shift is equally powerful and really where ultimately where the money is made. So Nick, take it away.
Yeah. Where to start? Keep this in time. Ultimately, we all have something we want to get to, right? We're all trying to close a gap. And this is a bimodal strategy, it's a barbell. It has two ends of it. One is explore, computer science would call it explore, exploit. Medicine or chiropractors, right, or doctors might consider it MRV, MED, maximum recoverable volume and minimum effective dose. The traits are, on one side, it is a little bit unknown. Inherently, there's more risk for that reason, and there's more upside. On the other side, on the exploit side, the minimum effective dose side, it's known, it's reliable. Quick example, I have exercised for 15 years consistently, like every single day, up until like a year ago. And all that to say that in order for me to actually change the way that I look, I would have to exercise. I would probably have to have an insane training volume and intensity to really change the way I look. So let's say 7 days a week, 6 days a week, minimum. But to maintain the way that I look, I can actually get away with like 3 days a week for 30 to 45 minutes. So if changing the way that I look is the goal here, this is the easy example I think everybody will kind of understands. 5 days a week of training with the intent of changing the way that I look, there's a ton of resources being hemorrhaged. We talk about recapturing and reallocating because it's not enough to make a change, but it's more than I need to get what I'm already getting. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. I think everybody here is going to understand like physiology better than I do. So what we want to do is we want to avoid the middle, because the middle is not enough to change anything, but more than we need to do to get what we're already getting. When we start a business, oftentimes, we either think it is going to be hyper reliable, but more often than not, we go for the upside. Why don't we have a job? Because owning our business will make more money. We'll have more free time. We'll get filthy rich. We'll have the life we want. It's all upside, right? Unfortunately, what happens is we say, okay, we're going to build this business, and then it's going to turn into an asset that works for us on autopilot. We're going to move it from the left, upside, explore. We're going to explore it. We're going to figure it out. Then we're going to move it to the right. It's going to be reliable, minimum effective dose. It'll require very little to keep running it. Okay. MED is minimum effective dose. How little of a thing can I do to get the desired result? MRV, I'm answering the question in the chat. MRV is maximal recoverable volume. How much of a thing can I do before I burn out? Those are the only two ends that I recommend and we recommend you play on. So either all in or enough to maintain. It doesn't make any sense to do more than you need to maintain, but not enough to make a difference. That's all resources that need to get recaptured, reallocated. So we have our business, startup side. We think we're going to move it to the reliable side. What actually happens is we move it to the middle. It no longer has the upside because we cannot have more patients, right? Like the upside's not there because we have a relationship business or because we don't have enough time or because things keep breaking. Evidence shows us that the upside is not there currently. And that's okay. But it's not on the reliable side because we're still putting out fires. You know, if we can't go away for a week, come back, and the thing's still running, or if we expect to do 5 hours tomorrow and ends up being 7, that is unreliable. Okay, so it's not over there. So in the middle is a job. You might own it, and that's awesome. You know, like owning a job is great. But in the middle, you don't have an asset that's working for you, and you don't have a moonshot with upside. So often what we do is we try a new thing. We solve the problem by trying a new thing. We try something new. We explore. It has upside. It's unknown. And then we end up with another job. Got 2 jobs. Even people that invest, even in something with like crypto, they end up with a freaking job managing crypto. And so we keep doing these things and ending up in the middle. We end up with more and more and more jobs, not a ton of reliable assets that are going to put out what we expect them to put out when we expect it to without a ton of putting out of fires, but also nothing that still has the capacity to go to the moon and back because of the limitations of we have to manage it. Or inherently it just doesn't have upside. Some things, you know, just putting your money in a savings account just doesn't have the upside that you would be looking for there. So that's the barbell. That's the bimodal strategies. We want on one side reliable things, on the other side explore things. If we explore things, we want them to have upside. And eventually, when we're done exploring, we want to move them to the reliable side. That's how we keep all of the upside while mitigating some of the uncertainty, right? So you can see here, most things I'm willing to bet, most things, this is when I consult every business owner I've talked to, has a whole bunch of things in the middle. I call that the convert phase because it's not exploitable. You can't just let it run. And the upside's not there. It's not explorable. Like there's you could explore new options, but are they really going to have the upside that you're looking for? It's to write down everything you do, and you have this sheet in the curriculum page, and then either eliminate it. This is what I recommend. We're going to have action steps for you in a minute, but then it's like we either got to eliminate it or we got to move it all the way over to the reliable side. Or maybe it should be an upside play and we have to know, or maybe we should have more upside plays. Like these are the things we've got to sort everything we're doing and figure out where it falls. But I'll kick it back to Dan in just a second. The key here is recognizing that if you're doing stuff in the middle of that strategy, you do not have the reliability or the upside. And one of Dan's commandments is we must have asymmetric risk to the upside. And anything in the middle does not. So it's recognizing those things and making the changes necessary. Now, last thing that I'll say is evidence. It says, but is there evidence? People will still try to tell me, and Dan, say, hey, look, you're in the middle of the barbell. It's not reliable. It doesn't have the upside. The daycare, for example. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with daycares. I'm saying you're not going to 100x your daycare. And they say, oh, no, it could happen. It's like, but after 2, 3, 4, 5 years, is there evidence of that? And if not, then we have to consider moving it over to the reliable side as an asset, figuring out if it closes the gap, which I think Dan will talk about. And then you may have to find something else to explore. But getting clear on where everything you're doing is, you'd be shocked at how much of your life, business in particular, and finance stuff just sits right in the middle. Not enough to move the needle, but you could actually stop doing a lot of the stuff you're doing and be in the same place you are now. That is a sign of resources that could get reallocated. And so hopefully that makes sense.
Well, jumping in on what you were just sharing, Nick. So what we see in the hundreds of thousands of businesses at this point that we've consulted on over the last 10, 20 years, is that you talk to the entrepreneur and they have a really, really aggressive goal. They want to retire in 5 years or 10 years. Okay. Well, do you have a solvable equation? Do you know what you need to bring in cash-wise each year or each month to be able to close the gap? Of course, the answer is no. So step one, as we taught, create your solvable equation. We need to know how much cash we need to get to the outcome to close the gap. Least amount of moves, least amount of risk, least amount of effort. That's, by definition, what we're talking about an exploit. It's reliable and known, right? So first off, they lack the solvable equation, so they don't actually know how much effort to put in. The next thing is what you see, to your point, Nick, is that they have a lot of stuff in the middle. So going back to the compile or collect and analyze phase, last week's class, we talked about having you compile the metadata, the data about the data around your business. So taking each expense item as an example and compiling information about how frequently do you use that vendor, and how frequently do you pay for the expense. And what we find is that for the most part, people's expenses are all over the place. So they've got things that are billed weekly, some things that are billed monthly, some things that are quarterly, some things are biannual and annual. Well, that's inherently not reliable from a cash flow perspective. If you just turn that into an equation, and which is what I love to do, but you turn it into an equation and you calculate volatility, you go, hey, you got a tremendous amount of volatility in your spending habits because of just the frequency in which these bills, these transactions hit your bank account. So you could have a really, really reliable business if you just got all of your expenses to be flatlined, to be even throughout the year. How can we turn everything into a monthly cost? Because now we have reliability. If we know exactly what our cost is going to be each month, then it becomes really easy to know what our revenue needs to be, right? So what we'll end up seeing when we compile that information is, wow, we got payments all over the place. No wonder we have all this volatility. And if you did the exercise to eliminate the lost months, you probably will see, if you dig into it deeper, that some of those lost months are because of quarterly or biannual expenses that just sort of pop up. The other thing you start to see is that one of the questions is this expense core? Yes or no? Meaning, can the business operate without it? And if the answer is no, why don't we just go ahead and cancel it? Right? Because we just established the business can operate without it. And back to but is there evidence? You end up often with a bunch of pushback. No, I need this. What? We just established it's not core. And underneath that is some assumption, that some bias that, well, this expense exists because it's going to save me money, right? I'm paying for this cost because it's going to free up my time. My time's too valuable. That's opportunity cost, right? By working on this thing over here, I can't work on the things I want to be doing. And so I've outsourced it, or if that's the case, there should be some evidence to support that's actually happened. If there's not, we need to re-examine. So as you go through the compile and analyze phase, really what you're identifying is what is all the stuff in the middle that has limited upside, and it's creating a lack of reliability in our business and therefore in our cash flow. We need to convert those things to reliable for any business that doesn't have the potential to 10x, 20x, etc. So we need the system reliability so that we have the consistent cash flow to feed into our solvable equation. Once we lock that in, then we only focus on opportunities with tremendous upside. Nick mentioned one of my 4 commandments for wealth acceleration is that we only, we bias asymmetric risk to the upside, meaning opportunities where the upside is substantially greater than the downside. If I told you that I had an opportunity for you that had the potential of generating a 1,000% return, but the probability of that 1,000% return is only 10%, you should take that opportunity every time. It's called expected value. You take the probability times the expected return. 1,000% return times 10% would still give you 100% expected value, 100% return. We need to be in positions where we can take those opportunities. And we can't be in those positions when we're stuck with all this stuff with limited upside that's creating a lack of system reliability that does not allow us to play in the explore phase. The only way that you get to the 5 really aggressive goals in the legacy is when you have system reliability on your core business. So my CPA firm, it's going to allow me to have financial security and allow me to pay all the bills and live the life that I would like to live and my family would like to live. But it's not a 10x business. It's not going to close me out overnight, cash me out. That means that I need to make it as reliable and consistent as possible so that I have excess cash that I can play in upside only, asymmetric upside only. Question was, please state the formula again. So there's a formula, it's called expected value. And expected value is where you take all the potential outcomes. So I'm going to take all the different investments, and then you multiply the potential rate of return or the potential outcome times the probability of that outcome occurring. And then I can sum up sum up that number, and that gives me the total expected value. I have a workbook for that, and I'll drop it into the syllabus. That's one of the things that I'll do is I'll look at every potential outcome. I'll assign a probability to it. Potential outcome times probability equals expected value. I use that to come up with weighting towards what's the best fit choice. But again, if you had something with 1,000% potential return, but the probability is only 10%, the expected value would be 100%. 1,000 times 10%. Most of us just focus on the 10%. I mean, well, it's only a 10% chance. Well, if I had made many bets with substantial upside, that's how I put myself in a position where at some point one of those is going to hit, and I'm effectively fully funded all my priorities. Nick, anything you want to add on?
I think that just to bring it full circle, which I think we actually have a chart to help illustrate this, is we spend a lot of time on resource allocation and recapture and reallocating, and that this is just another example of another framework to put everything you're doing on to help figure out, like, the strategy to me is not what's the next thing I can do, but we just come back to, okay, what compile, analyze, strategize, execute, where are we at? Oh, I got a lot of stuff in the middle here. That's all resources that we can recapture. And then, obviously you from a finance angle, you just explained it better than I ever could. But the framework is just, it's so powerful. And to me, again, full circle, the power of this whole methodology is resource allocation. When do I know when to reallocate resources? Should I be reallocating resources? So that's all I have on that.
And the answer is, if I do the compile and analyze and it goes into the middle column, then that's an opportunity for me to recapture and reallocate resources. So we'll get you access to this workbook. And now that you've gone through, or hopefully you've gone through compiling and analyzing with it, we can give a structure. What's that, Nick?
I'm going to give you guys one thing that drives people nuts when I say it, because you can't forget it. If you compile and analyze, which is obviously the recommendation, and you have a bunch of stuff in the middle, and you think it's sexier or more fun to go to a bunch of events and run a bunch of ads and do a bunch of marketing stuff, that's fine. To each their own. But I promise if you got a bunch of stuff in the middle, you are stepping over dollars to pick up pennies. And I say that because it drives people nuts once they hear it and they know. It's like, once you see it, you can't unsee it. Compile, analyze, and if that middle column is full of stuff. Whatever you're doing that is not directly addressing that middle column is stepping over dollars to pick up pennies.
Yeah, and part of the reason why this is called thriving under any economy is that, just take, for example, going into this pandemic, what do we do for every business? We compiled and analyzed. Do we have any resources that are stuck in the middle? Let's move it to reliability as quickly as possible. And then let's put together a plus minus list, meaning essentially it's like a shopping list of what are the things that I'm going to add when they go on discount, and what are the things I'm going to subtract when or if things go sideways. So we already have a process in place where we're systematically, at least every quarter, going through and recompiling and reanalyzing. Is anything new been added to the middle? If yes, that becomes our strategic plan, because we're going to put all of our effort for that business towards moving it to reliability, because we only want to play and explore, because explore is what's going to cash us out. And then we just maintain a plus minus list of what are we going to buy when it goes on discount, and then what are we going to subtract if things get worse. So we're already in a position basically to continue to exist in the reliability area. With that, let's move over to talking about execution. This is one of those things that when my mentor told me this, similar to what you just said, Nick, you can't unsee it. So what we've been taught is that we should start with purpose. But the problem is that for many of us, that creates a lot of anxiety, because especially for younger folks, for those of you who have employees and you ask them their why, they don't necessarily know. And so that can actually create more uncertainty for the more anxiety. I'm supposed to know my why, but I don't know my why. What do I do? So when we're unclear of our purpose, we start with frequency or repetition. Frequency, repetition then leads to intensity, and through the intensity, we find our purpose. So we talk about playing your game. In my game, growing up, basketball. So whenever I'm feeling lost, my coach tells me, why don't you go put up some shots? So I go put up a bunch of shots and I get some frequency. And then over the course of a week or two, I pick up my intensity, and then I get clarity. And from that clarity is where I find purpose. So we end up not executing oftentimes because we're so stuck in what does it mean? What is in the grand scheme of things? Think about like Maslow's hierarchy. We get really stuck on self-actualization, but we're not funding basic needs. And so rather than getting stuck and fixated purely on the self-actualization, let's get some reps in. Let's get some action towards moving things over to reliability. Through that process, we find intensity. And with intensity becomes clarity on our purpose. Now, some of us, for whatever reason, we just have clarity from day one of what our purpose is. And that's awesome. But that's the exception to the norm, especially with your employees who are not entrepreneurs. They're not clear on their purpose. Get them to doing the doing, focused on frequency, increasing their intensity. Then you can really have the conversation about purpose. So it's going to be really easy to do all the strategizing and never do the execution. Anything you want to add on to that, Nick?
I heard your mentor say that as well, and it just becomes a new fundamental truth. And you realize, just to tie it back into the barbell, if you look at the middle, there's a whole bunch of things that maybe seem more appealing. If you sit down and you work through those things consistently, you start to put your stamp on things. And the explore side, sometimes the home run shot becomes crystal clear through doing the work of getting everything else reliable, right? Calling the vendors, sorting out those payment schedules, all stuff that isn't super fun. But in the process of doing that, a lot of times the super obvious moonshot home run play that's going to cash you out is a byproduct of sitting down and doing that work.
So let's try and close some loops and bring this all together. So the question we should be asking ourselves is, am I reliably on track to fund my core priorities? So core priorities are paying off debt, having reserves, funding retirement, or as we say, retirement is the amount of money you need to not have to work. Add those two things up, that's what most people would describe as financial security. So am I reliably on track to be able to achieve financial security? Now, financial certainty is when we add in our preference-based priorities, the legacy stuff, right? So we may have financial security and still feel unfulfilled because there's a legacy or something more that we want. But back to Maslow's hierarchy, we need to be able to fund our basic needs reliably and consistently before we can ascend to self-actualization. So are we reliably on track to fund those core priorities? If you go, I don't know, what does that mean? That means you probably aren't clear on your solvable problem. So you can go to the Certainty app or other tools that we've shared to figure out your solvable problem. How much do I need to generate to be able to hit my target within the timeline that I have described? When I'm not clear on the amount I need and the timeline, then I have a multivariable equation, and we can't solve a multivariable equation, right? So if we're not clear on, if we don't know how to answer that question, then we need to get clear first on our solvable equation. Once, assuming we are clear, then the answer is yes or no. Well, let's just start with no first. So I'm not reliably on track to fund my core priorities. Well, then we need to bias liquidity, cash. So I have a lot of folks who will, in my CPA firm business, who will reach out and ask about putting money into tax-deferred retirement accounts, as an example. Maybe it's a self-directed IRA, maybe it's a 401k, maybe it's a simple IRA, whatever it may be. And they go, hey, I heard I can get a tax deduction if I put money into this, or it'll be completely tax-free. Should I do it? Well, are you reliably on track to fund all your core priorities within the timeline you've set? Because if you're telling me that you're 40 and you don't want to have to work in 5 years, and you're not sure if you're reliably on track with that, then putting money into a tax-deferred retirement account is going to get you further away from what you actually want, right? So the tax-deferred retirement accounts can't be accessed until you're in your mid-60s, but you just said you want to be able to retire, not have to work in 5 years. So you're going to tie up your capital that needs to go towards funding your priorities in something you can't access for 26 years, but you're saying you want to be able to access it in 5. We're going to get further away from what we actually want. We need to bias getting closer. So that's what I mean by biasing liquidity. We need the cash available to us to fund our core priorities within the timeline we've set. So we're going to bias having the cash, or having the ability to access the cash quickly. We're not going to tie it up in ventures that are longer than the timeline that we've set. We're tied up in tax for retirement accounts. Then we're going to focus on R&R. That stands for recapturing and reallocating. So anything that's in the middle, in the convert area. And so we've compiled and analyzed, and we found a bunch of stuff in the middle. Because we're not reliably on track to fund our core priorities, we're going to convert everything. We're going to move it over to reliability. That's going to be our focus. We're not going to get distracted by shiny objects, etc., because we have a solvable equation. We know if we free up this cash, we're going to hit all of the priorities that we've defined. So why would we not do that? Well, we wouldn't do it because we prefer the certainty of misery. Back to one of the quotes of the day. So once we've moved everything from uncertain to reliable, then the question becomes, is your trajectory now appropriate? Meaning, are we now on track to reliably fund our core priorities? If no, then we go back to focus, intensity, purpose, right? So we're going back to Do we tie up cash unnecessarily? Do we still have things that are in the middle that are inherently unreliable? So we have to work that until we're able to say, yes, we're reliably on track. Then we don't get to play in the explore area. Because again, I think about business as gambling. That's gambling with the money we need to fund our basic needs. So we have to be really careful about it, because otherwise, if we're not able to sustain our core priorities, we have all this volatility. We can't remain stoic. We can't our emotions are going to take over most likely. There's some other tangentially related things that are going to happen. They're going to keep us away from being able to make bets where there's a 10% probability of 1,000 or 10,000% return. I can't have a 10% probability because I'm still unsure about if I'm going to be able to pay my bills in a few months. So we've sort of tied our hand behind our back, put ourselves in this position of certain misery, because we're putting money over in the explore area when we have not put ourselves in a position where we are reliably on track to fund our core priorities. Once we know that we're reliably on track, then we're reallocating any excess resources to biasing momentum. What's the fastest path forward, least amount of risk, least amount of effort, and all of that needs to go to the explore side of the barbell. The explore is where we have incredible asymmetric risk to the upside. Bet $1, I can get $10, $100, or $1,000 back. So I need to be in a position where I'm taking all the extra resources that are above and beyond reliability and allocating that to explore. That's what's going to lead us to getting to certainty. Certainty is that we have funded all of our core priorities. We are reliably on track to fund all of our core priorities. We're also now reliably on track to fund all of our legacy or preference-based priorities. That's really the game. That's the game that we play day after day. That's when we consult on other businesses. This is the game that we're playing, which is compile, analyze, make sure that they have the solvable equation, bias the liquidity. Let's not tie things up until we get to reliability. Once we got to reliability, any excess cash, we're just making asymmetric bets. Nick, what would you like to add on to that?
Now, knocked out of the park. I'll answer this question real quick. FIP, frequency, intensity, purpose. So the previous slide was talking about that, right? Frequency, intensity, purpose. I would just say that imagery, I use imagery, I try to use things people can't forget, is there's a gap. Everything Dan does, it's why I love spending time with him when he's teaching, is it helps me see so much stuff like this. It's about closing the gap between where you're at, where you want to be. And everything, I think of it as a bridge. We're building the bridge across, right? And if we don't follow this methodology, this is the highest probability way, obviously, in our opinion, that you build that bridge. A lot of the other stuff is sounds really good, but it leaves a very high probability that no bridge gets built at all. Meaning, oh, well, I really want to hurry and get this done, faster. But if we don't first get on track reliably to get it done in 10 years, after we do that, we could try to condense it down to 3. But if we don't do it in that order, the risk we run is it doesn't get done at 3, and we have no resources, and it likely doesn't get done at all. So that's the imagery, just to share that, is we're trying to build a bridge across. This is the way to lock in the fact that it is certainly going to get built, given what we know. Now we can play, we can play all in. We could take gambles. We can hit those, swing for the fences, take those 1 to 1,000 bets, all that stuff. Because with some level of reliability, we know the bridge is going to get built anyway, in a timeline that is appropriate. And that like as Dan is articulated so well, that allows us to play at a level that a lot of people will envy, because, it must be nice to be able to take those kind of risks and spend that kind of money and have the money to do those things. But we want to have the money to do those things and spend that kind of money and play those games after we have certainty that, yeah, I can do that because the bridge is going to get built in a timeline that is appropriate regardless. So that's the big difference in my mind that I'm thinking about is, um, can I lock in? Can I lock this in? Can I lock this in? Can I lock this in? Which is biasing liquidity. Is trajectory appropriate? No. Okay. Focus on you just keep focus on locking it in. And then once it's locked in, based on the math and the evidence, uh, you can live a little more freely, but you can take more chances. And again, you can you really swing for the fences, and potentially the difference is you can go from, if you lock it in, you can go from 10 years to overnight with a huge, like, crazy stuff happens, right? Lottery, Dogecoin, like crazy stuff happens. Um, which is why we swap over to biasing momentum. So it's just, hopefully that's a helpful framework, but I'm always thinking about, and I'll tell my clients, like, are you building half a bridge? Because you have this great idea, you're going to go all in and close down your company and do all this stuff. But if you're only building half a bridge, you still haven't closed the gap, and you're kind of SOL, right? No resources, nothing reliable to bridge the rest of the gap.
To jump into on the frequency, intensity, and purpose, the tendency for the entrepreneur is they go, we work through the flow chart, we got the solvable equation. Are we reliably on track? We say no. We go through the exercise, making sure we have the right liquidity. We're not tying up cash unnecessarily. We focus on the recapture, reallocation, but then our trajectory is not there yet. For whatever reason, maybe we haven't been in business long enough, economy, external forces, whatever it may be. And so then what we do is we focus on purpose first. Hey, this is what I want my life to be about. So we blow everything up, and we take all our money and we throw it and explore. I talked about the chaos rigidity model. It's very similar, which is we get to the end, we're not getting the outcome that we want. And so then we move to a fragile system that's either a bunch of chaos or too rigid, meaning we're not going to be able to sustain this in perpetuity. We can't do this forever. So the tendency would be, well, I'm not living to my full purpose, and so essentially I'm going to blow this all up. And what we want to do instead is go back to frequency, intensity, purpose, work the process, keep closing the gap, least amount of moves, least amount of effort to get the outcome that we want. We're going to get there faster if we don't introduce rogue variables. Rigidity and chaos model is interjecting these rogue variables, right? We're going to get to reliability as quickly as possible. And then, because we didn't blow ourselves up, now we have all this excess resource that we throw to explore plays. And so the danger, again, is that we go to purpose as a singular focus, and we blow things up, and we build a half bridge, to steal your analogy, Nick.
That's the we can play a game, the game of certainty, and again we'll have a couple weeks for Q&A and really drive home, I think, the tactical. But the game of certainty, the way that I think about it, and it's heavily influenced by spending time with Dan, is systematically, let's say you have three huge core priorities that make up your core capital number, systematically locking in each one so that you do not live a life without those things. And people have a very hard time thinking in those terms. They want all three of those things right now, and they strategize in a way that means, I'm going to get all three. All these things have to go right. I got to get some luck and a lot of good breaks, and I'll get all three of these things. But the flip side, the only other alternative is they end up with none of those things. And so this whole methodology, just to help everybody kind of understand, is systematically locking in each one. And then as they get locked in, collapsing the time so you have them faster. Outcome is, hopefully, you have everything you want, no matter what route you decide to go. the probability of you ending up with none of those things is much, much lower if we have a framework like this than if we keep chasing things without locking in the wins, right? We don't know if we don't have a reference to say, okay, we got to bias liquidity right now. We got to focus on reallocating our resources, right? We got to recapture, reallocate. All right, now's my trajectory there. Not yet. Okay, buckle back down, do the work. Now am I on track? Okay, now I'm on track. Now I can collapse time. By not having that reference, we end up in a position where we have either a full bridge or half a bridge, right? And a half a bridge is no more useful than no bridge at all. There's no, right? There's what you want out of life. There's zero benefits to getting almost there. So that's the way that I think about this, and why I work so hard to make sure that the Dan's methodology gets in front of people, and we're here again for the next couple weeks to make sure that it's super impactful for you guys.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick. So I'm going to stop the share and stop the recording. Actually, Nick, you've got to stop the recording. And